Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasoda Nandana Jandarangana. Yasoda Nandana Jandarangana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasoda Nandana Jana Ranjana. Yasoda Nandana Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ramu, Hare Ramu, Ramu Ramu, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Asatora Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantaguti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 4, Text number 13. Tat sarvam naha samachakshva prishtaha yattaha kinchana manye tvam vishaye vacham snatum anyatra chandasat. Tatsarvam na samachakshvam prishto yad iha kinchanam manyetvam vishaye vacham snatum anyatra chandasat. Tatsarvam na samachakshva prishto yad iha kinchana manyetvam vishaye vacham snatum anyatra chandasat. Tatsarvam na samachakshva prishto yad iha kinchana manyetvam vishaye vacham snatam anyatra chandasat. Please chant. Sarvam na samachakshva prishto yad iha kinchana manyetvam vishaye vacham snatam anyatra chandasa. Ladies, please. Anyone else? Anyone on this side? Okay. Synonyms. Tat, that. Sarvam, all. Naha, unto us. Samachakshva, clearly explain. Prishtaha, questioned. Yataha, herein. Kinchana, all that. Manye, we think. Tvam, you. Vishaye, in all subjects. Vacham, meaning of words. Snatam, fully acquainted. Anyatra, except. Chandasat, portion of the Vedas. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. We know that you are, well, first of all, we all know who's speaking. This is Shonaka Rishi. Okay, he is speaking, and he's speaking to Sutta Goswami. And he's pretty much been introducing Sutta Goswami and also talking about Shukdev Goswami. And he's asked a number of questions in the previous verses. So now he's honing in on the point that Sutta Goswami is an expert in this subject matter. And that is because he heard the Bhagavatam from Shukdev Goswami in person. Translation. We know that you are expert in the meaning of all subjects, except some portions of the Vedas, and thus you can clearly explain the answers to all the questions we have just put to you. Please repeat. We know that you are expert in the meaning of all subjects, except some portions of the Vedas. And thus you can clearly explain the answers to all the questions we have just put to you. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The difference between the Vedas and the Puranas is like that between the Brahmins and the Pravajakas. A Pravajaka is one who wanders around and distributes the great teachings of the Vedas. The Brahmins are meant to administer some fruitive sacrifices mentioned in the Vedas, but the Parivajakacharyas, or learned preachers, are meant to disseminate transcendental knowledge to one and all. So we have quite a number of Parivajakacharyas here. In fact, every day a number of devotees are going out and distributing these different literatures, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Instruction, Science of Self-Realization, Higher Taste. So this dissemination is to enable people who are in deep, dark ignorance to wake up and realize where they're at and where they can go to improve their situation considerably. So those are the learned preachers, and they are meant to disseminate transcendental knowledge, not worldly knowledge, but knowledge which will take persons out of the material impress or the material influence and bring them to the transcendental influence. So they are meant to disseminate transcendental knowledge to one and all. As such, the Parivajakacharyas are not always expert in pronouncing the Vedic mantras. That's not where their expertise is. Their expertise is in disseminating, distributing, teaching, sharing. As such, the Parivajakacharyas are not always expert in pronouncing the Vedic mantras, as well as the Brahmanas, which are practiced systematically by accent and meter by the Brahmins, who are meant for administering Vedic rites. Yet it should not be considered that the Brahmins are more important than the itinerant preachers. Generally, in communities or societies, Brahmins are looked up to very highly, because after all, they're considered to be the most intelligent and they also know the different rites and the rituals to help the general improvement in the community or the society. They know the different there are different practices which can be given right from the time a child is just born until the time a person dies. He can be given certain rites and rituals which are to help him in his upward and onward movement towards the spiritual world. There is no difference also between the Vedic mantras. Did I skip something? Can you say that a little louder? What did I skip? Okay, they are one and different. Yes? Okay, sorry about that. They are one and different simultaneously. Let me go back so that we know what they are. Yes, so as such, the Parvajakacharyas are not always expert in pronouncing the Vedic mantras, which are practiced systematically by accent and meter by the Brahmins, who are meant for administrating Vedic rites. Yet it should not be considered that the Brahmins are more important than the itinerant preachers. They are one and different simultaneously, because they are meant for the same end in different ways. And so what is that end? The Brahmins that we are speaking about here are meant to help in the purification. Purification of mind, purification of intelligence, purification of speech, purification of emotion. So the overall purification takes place through the Brahmins, enunciating the different Vedic rituals. The Brahmins also enunciate these Vedic rituals not only for the upliftment and ennoblement and improvement of the society, but they also help and assist the members of the society to obtain certain goals or desires or wants that they have as well. So they serve a very important part of any society or community. So as it is mentioned here, they are one and different simultaneously because they are meant for the same end. The end ultimately is that the Brahmins are there, ideally, supposedly, to assist us not only in our upward climb, but in our attainment of God realization. Brahman means, the word Brahman means God. And when we speak of a Brahmana, we are speaking of one who is supposed to be one with God in consciousness and understanding and in word and thought. So such a Brahman, when he speaks and when he expresses and when he describes the different principles of spiritual life, is very useful in enabling us to achieve self-realization, God realization, and pure love of God. So it says the same end, and that's the same end that the preachers, the Parvajakacharyas, they have the same thing. They go out, they distribute literatures, they talk to people. Remember, a person who is distributing books, he has a few books in his bookcase, and he puts a book in somebody's hand, and then for 2 or 3 minutes, he has to give them a quick summary of what is this in this book, and he has to make it so attractive, so likable, so enchanting that the person can't resist it. And that's an art, and you get it from Krishna. Because why do we read the Bhagavad Gita? Because Krishna's words are so enchanting, so inspiring, so uplifting, so enthusing that we want to go on reading them. So similarly, when a Parvajakaacharya, he goes, he puts a book in a person's hand, and he begins to say, "Excuse me, sir, but I'd like you to have something that I read this book, and I have had such an incredibly wonderful experience. I used to be very nervous and full of stress and anxiety. That's all changed. And if you have even a smidgen of it, you can change your life also by this incredible book." I mean by B-U-Y, but B-Y. But that comes a little later, the B-U-Y. So he said, buy this book. What's it about? Well, it's about remaking your life in such a way that your family life will go better, your business life will go better, your personal life will go better. And the words in these these books, when you read them and they're explained, each little verse is explained, you will have a totally new view of what life is about and what life is for, and you will be scratching your head and saying, wow, why didn't I get this 50 years ago? So this is what one preacher would say, namely myself, but I'm sure Madhava here, he would say it's something different, or Prem Sankirtan, he has a different, but basically the idea is the same, to entice them, to enthuse them, to enthrall them, that this is a book they should not pass by. Because if they do, they're passing the greatest blessing, benediction that they could ever do, and therefore the person, if he is excited enough, if he is stimulated enough, if he is enthused enough, then he will say, well, okay, how much? How much? Just ask for a donation. But we don't, if you want to give $50 or less, that's fine with us. You know, it's called suggestive. Or whatever. You don't have to even say that. Give whatever you can, and I'm sure you will be blessed and benefited. That's ideal, because then they're not putting it on a commercial, level. You're putting it on the level of, look, whatever you can is good. We use the funds to print more books so that more people can be happy as I am and as you will surely be. So please, give what you can. And so on. So, therefore, as Srila Prabhupada mentions here, that there is no difference also between the Vedic mantras and what is explained in the Puranas and Itihatas. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, it is mentioned in the Madhyandina Shruti that all the Vedas, namely the Sama, Atharva, Rig, Yajur, Puranas, Itihasas, Upanishads, etc., are emanations from the breathing of the Supreme Lord. So let me get into just a few little definitions here so that we all understand what is being mentioned in this last paragraph. First of all, there's two ways of thinking about the Vedas. Now, the Vedas specifically and principally and primarily are four: Samaveda, Atharva Veda, Rig Veda, and Yajur Veda. So they are called the four Vedas, and they are known as Shruti. Okay? So Shruti, S-R-U-T-I. They are the Vedas. Okay? They were one Veda originally, and they were divided by Vyasadeva and his assistants into four Vedas to simplify this entire big, gigantic source of knowledge. And by dividing it into four, they were able to catalog and categorize different aspects of it. And then, of course, there is the Puranas. So what are the Puranas? Well, the Puranas are called Itihasas. And Itihasa is history, okay? What do we mean by history? We mean historical examples to explain, to elaborate on, and to further elucidate the principles of the Vedas. So the Itihasas, such as the Puranas, and as I said, the Itihasas, they give various incidents from the history that has occurred from time immemorial. They have no limit. They go back millions of years, some of them. So they give examples, they give incidents, they give illustrations, which is the Purana we have. The Purana we are on, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is known as the what Purana? Yes, the Bhagavat Purana. So, and it's considered the cream of the Puranas because it came after much deliberation on the part of Vyasadeva. As we will learn when we read on, we will see that Vyasadeva was not satisfied with even the Puranas that he had written. There was something missing, and it would take his guru, Maharaj, Narada Muni, to wake him up and explain to him, what you've written is nice, what you've written is useful, what you have written is understandable, but you've left out something very, very important, which would give more tang, more taste, more thrill, more uplift to your to your writings, which will entice people more, which will enthrall people more, which will pull people in more. And those are some of the deep and the intimate, close pastimes of Krishna. And unless you give that, people will read what you have. They will read with interest, but you can get them even more interested if you present these different pastimes with much more intimate detail. So, coming back here, is that clear? The difference between Shruti and Smriti? Smriti is Puranas and Itihasas, which explain the Shruti statements that are made of those 4 Vedas. Okay? The only difference is that the Vedic mantras are mostly begun with pranava omkar. Om. This is not a yoga class. It's a bhakti yoga class, of course. So, Om is a very important part of these mantras. Usually they are recited first with the word Om. So as it's mentioned here, the only difference is that the Vedic mantras are mostly begun with pranava omkar, and it requires some training to practice the metric pronunciation of the Vedic mantras. Metric pronunciation means every verse often has its own meter. For example, the meter that I spoke today, if I can find it. Here it is. Yeah, the meter of today. Tat sarvam nasama chakshva prishto yad eha kinchanai manye tvam vishaye vacham snatam anyatra chandasad. There are other tunes, by the way, but the main thing is that it should have a certain meter so that it actually is a bit charming to the ear, and one wants to read on as a result. We have other meters too, some of like the Brahma Samhita. Anybody like to do a verse from the Brahma Samhita and show that meter? Mati Purusham Tam Aham Vijami. Very good, thank you. So you can see a second one. We also do a third meter here. Da 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 ba da 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 bum bum ba bum bum. Very beautiful. So, yeah, they're charming. So they're nice to chant, and they're pretty easy too once you know how this tune is supposed to go. So, as it says, the only difference is that the Vedic mantras are mostly begun with pranava and omkar, and it requires some training to practice the metric pronunciation of the Vedic mantras. You have to listen very carefully. But that does not mean that Srimad Bhagavatam is of less importance than the Vedic mantras. Okay, so Bhagavatam is being differentiated from the Vedic mantras. The Vedic mantras we're talking about here are from the 4 Vedas, okay? So, because Bhagavatam is also Vedic, but it's, as it mentions before, it's historical, it's incidental. It's not the strict Vedic teachings, which I've already mentioned, the Yajurveda, Samaveda, which I don't know very much about. I mean, I have only a vague idea because I don't chant them. Samveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, etc. So on the contrary, it is this is a very important point. But that does not mean that Srimad Bhagavatam is of less importance than the Vedic mantras. On the contrary, it is the ripened fruit of all the Vedas, as stated before. Besides that, the most perfectly liberated soul, Srila Shukdev Goswami, is absorbed in the studies of Bhagavatam, although he is already self-realized. So here we have the statement that Shukdev Goswami is fully self-realized, but he gets so much pleasure, so much relish, so much delight, so much satisfaction, so much fulfillment in chanting them. And he's considered the highest exponent of chanting. When we speak of experts in certain areas such as hearing and chanting and remembering. Chanting is Shukdeva Goswami. And who is the hearing? Who does hearing? Who's noted for as expert, huh? Yes, Pariksit Maharaj. Thank you. And hearing, chanting, and who is expert in remembering? Starts with a P. Prahlad Maharaj, yes. So hearing, chanting, remembering, serving the lotus feet. Who's the best server of the lotus feet of the Lord? Yes, Lakshmi Devi. So Lakshmi Devi is known because generally she is massaging the feet of Lord Vishnu. That is one of her services. And she does it so expertly that she has earned that as an eternal service. So going on. Srila Sutta Goswami is following his footsteps. And now, let me just give the last point so that we know where that follows from. So on the contrary, it is the ripened fruit of all the Vedas as stated before. Besides that, the most perfectly liberated soul, Srila Shukdev Goswami, is absorbed in the studies of the Bhagavatam, although he is already self-realized. So why would he do this, though? Not only does he get delight and pleasure and satisfaction, but he feels it helps to further advance him. I mean, the word self-realized is just a word, but how do we take that word and translate it into meaningful experience? Well, what it means is there are higher and higher and higher and higher and higher levels of understanding, higher levels of blissfulness, higher levels of peacefulness. And so he obviously is feeling something which is improving, is benefiting, is heightening his God realization. So God realization is not a stasis or a static thing. It's ever increasing, ever rising, ever growing, ever building, ever expanding. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great that we have such wonderful scriptures which don't let us stop at any spot, but enable us, help us to move higher and higher and higher to a position of deeper and higher God realization. What other reason would he do this for? Not just because he's told to do this. Actually, no one ever told him. He was interested in it from the time he was born. When he came out of the womb, I believe he was 16 years. Was it 16 years or am I right on that? Okay, he was 16 years old. He didn't want to come out of the womb because he didn't want anything to do with the material world, thinking the material world would contaminate him, corrupt him, would sully him, because he was already self-realized while in the womb. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me for reasons. You have to ask him. But all we know is that he had this advanced knowledge. And when he came out of the womb, he immediately wanted to renounce his family, leave home, and be on his way to associate strictly and only with all the renunciant sages. So as he went walking along, his father, Vyasadeva, he said, wait, where are you going? You're just born. We're going to have the pleasure of your company. He says, no, I don't want any family life. He said, well, wait. So Vyasadeva went hastening after him. Wait, my son. So Shukdeva Goswami is walking really fast, so he rounded a bend, and he said, well, my poor mother and father, what are they going to do? They've been living for this day of having the child. All of you, some of you have had children. You know that if your child leaves home, it's a very almost shocking day. So he's thinking, what am I going to do? Okay, so what he did is he expanded himself, or replicated his form, and he caused that form to go back. So when Vyasadeva was coming near the bend, he saw the form of Shukdeva Goswami, but it was not the original form. So Shukdeva Goswami, oh, my father, I changed my mind. I want to live with the family. So the family was very happy. He's cheated them. He's outsmarted them. So he went and lived with the renunciants, you see. So the important point is to see how important it was to him to live this kind of life where he completely and totally absorbs himself in the loving service of Krishna. chanting his name, chanting his pastimes, chanting the mantras which glorify him, dancing in ecstasy in conjunction with his remembrance of the pastimes of Krishna, just like Lord Chaitanya would do. So, and he was completely free of all sensual desire, free of all sexual desire. There was no such thing as really sex to him. When he saw a woman, it was simply another soul. Soul, because he was absorbed as a soul in the Supreme Soul. That's all he knew. He could see differences, but they had such a diminutive effect or importance in his consciousness that when he would pass a group of naked girls, as it's mentioned in the text, it had no effect upon him whatsoever. It was the same as looking at a piece of wood or a piece of plaster or a sky or a cloud or a leaf or a flower. Same thing, because there was no sexual or material desire there. For there to be an arousal, there has to be a desire. So when there is no desire, now how could it be? How could he have no desire? It's normal for anyone in the material world to want to enjoy. Sexuality is the most intense form of pleasure available to human beings on the material platform. But there is another platform called the spiritual platform, the transcendental platform. And so in that case, the bliss that one gets is not at the midpoint of the body, but is at the heart. And it expands from the heart as transcendental bliss in various degrees of intensity. So a person will have transcendental bliss. He may have just the inklings of it at the beginning, and as he goes on practicing, becoming purer, becoming more devoted, becoming more sensitive, and becoming more of a glorifying person, and also through his actions becoming himself or herself glorifiable, then what happens is the bliss keeps growing, keeps growing, more intense, more overwhelming, more compelling, more all-consuming. Lord Chaitanya is a perfect example. He's the consummate, the end of all ends of devotees. So he was experiencing all kinds of ecstatic symptoms, such as he would be stunned one moment. He would be perspiring profusely. Or he would be, they call it horripilating, where the hairs of the arms or the neck go up, stand up. He was getting hairs standing on end. He would be trembling so sometimes his teeth would tremble. It looked like his teeth were going to pop out of his mouth. Yeah, such ecstasy he was having. So, trembling, his color would change from golden to white, blanched, and change back to golden. He would weep profusely and very forcefully. Sometimes the tears would come out of his eyes like squirting an atomizer. You know, you squeeze it and you know, it just comes right out at you. And everybody would be standing by to get the tears as they would jump out of his eyes. You know, they'd catch it and smear it all over their head and body. Wow, I got the tears of the Lord, of God. Can you imagine getting God's tears? So they wiped it all over themselves. Or if it fell on the floor, devotees would dive for it. Sometimes they get into little spats and fights. Who's going to get the tears? So, so weeping was another fun. And also one's voice could choke up. In other words, we see an example of that in the Srimad, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Does anybody remember the example where Lord Chaitanya tries to speak, but his voice chokes up? And remember where it was? At the big festival? I want to tell you. Huh? Yeah, but what did he say? Yeah, exactly. So it's Prem Sankirtan, it's good memory. It's very easy to remember because he does that. It's mentioned one time. But while he was trying to express his love for the Lord, he wanted to say the Lord's name, but because he was choked up, He couldn't get it out because you get tongue-tied. The tongue doesn't move, the voice doesn't move, so you're just kind of like almost speechless. So that's a very interesting point. So as Prabhupada mentions here, I'm picking up on the purport now, that Srila Sutta Goswami is following his footsteps of Shukdeva Goswami, and therefore his position is not the least less important because he was not expert in chanting Vedic mantras. He didn't know all the metric pronunciations, which depends more on practice than actual realization. Realization is more important than parrot-like chanting. And that's a very important point. I've known a number of devotees who, for the sake of wanting to be admired, wanting to be looked up to, wanting to be thought of as a learned scholar, they'll do some of these complicated mantras with the tunes, da 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 da, and go on 1, 5, 10, 30, 50. Person say, wow, he's learned. He knows so much. He's so erudite. So when a person does these things for show, for adoration, for attention, these have very little benefit both on the speaker and on the listener. And the reason they do is because it's being done for egotistical, egocentric purposes, which is not a spiritual purpose. That doesn't mean that a person can't chant mantras with the full heart and the full understanding as a glorious, wonderful service to the Lord by serving other beings who get the mantras and who can be benefited by them. And if that's foremost in the mind of the chanter, to serve the Lord and to serve the souls of all of those who are listening, then there is great benefit for everyone who's receiving this. So therefore there are two sides, and we have to keep that in mind. And we have to ask ourselves, am I doing this for my benefit, for my adoration, for my distinction, for my glorification, so that everyone will think of me as great and wonderful and glorious? Or am I doing this so that persons will think of Krishna as glorious, Krishna as great, Krishna as wonderful, Krishna as laudable, Krishna as worshipable, Krishna as adorable, Krishna, 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 hey. If we're doing it for that purpose, we get lots of blessings, lots of benefits, and as a result of those benefits, we continue to grow and develop our love for Krishna, which goes higher and higher, more and more intense, and the ecstatic symptoms that I discussed begin to manifest from us. Of course, a devotee who's very humble doesn't even want to be seen showing those symptoms, although in case of Lord Chaitanya, he's not an ordinary devotee, he's God. But he wanted us to show what happens when you become so overwhelmed, so overpowered, overcome, completely controlled by this devotional love. But in the case of many devotees, unless all are having ecstatic symptoms, generally they don't want to put on shows. They don't want to be looked at as being special. That's their humility. So sometimes they will hold back their tears when they're in a crowd. But when they're alone, they let it all out. Because it's between Krishna and themselves. And that makes it pure. That makes it true. That makes it clear. And that makes it real. Okay? So I want to thank you all very much for listening. It's been my pleasure. And I pray that everyone here experiences these incredible symptoms that I've been talking about by chanting the holy name Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, with heart, soul, body, mind, intelligence, and soul. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki